Welcome to the Classroom Narratives Healing and Education podcast, the space where education meets resilience. I'm Joey Weisler, and in each episode, we dive deep into the personal stories of educators, students, leaders, and frontline advocates who are navigating the complexities of modern education. Whether you're just starting your teaching journey or are a seasoned professional looking for inspiration, we'll explore how to foster meaningful change, prevent burnout, and build trauma-informed communities in our schools. Now, let's take a seat at the front of the classroom and get started. Welcome back to the podcast, everyone. Today, I am so privileged to be joined by Colleen Crisan, a dedicated educator with over 19 years of experience teaching middle and high school English. Colleen brings a unique perspective, having taught in Parkland near Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School during a tragic time, and she uses literature to help students navigate their emotions in safe and open ways. Colleen has a really powerful approach to integrating trauma-informed practices within education, especially by using stories as mirrors and windows to foster dialogue and healing among students. And I'm so excited to dive into this conversation with her because not only is she supportive in guiding students through the power of storytelling, but she was also my sixth grade language arts teacher. Colleen, do you remember what year that was?
I do not remember what year, but I remember little Joey sitting in my classroom.
We're talking 2006, 2007.
Oh my gosh, that was my second year teaching.
Wow, and look how quickly time flies. Well, it's great to have you on the podcast. Thank you so much again for joining us. So, the first thing I wanted to ask is in terms of education, you mentioned that your first year teaching was 2005, right? What were your opening years like with teaching? What were you experiencing during that time that even I was your student? And how have some of the lessons from that time helped you now 20 years later, or something maybe new educators can think about as well?
Wow, that was so long ago. I remember just the enthusiasm and coming straight out of my master's, I had all of these new skills that I wanted to share, and some of them worked and some of them totally flopped. And through the years, I just learned to inventory those skills, those lessons, the texts that resonated with kids, the ones that were unexpectedly triggering for some kids that I didn't think about. I think it's just an overall awareness of the age group and the varying perspectives that are sitting in front of me in the classroom. And through the years, I've learned to be more aware of that, more conscientious of that, and make sure that I use text that I can reach all kids from all different backgrounds, all different experiences with. I had this misconception that I needed to pick streamlined text that were kind of generic. And what I've found over the years, it's actually the more diverse text that are more powerful because they work on so many levels as windows and mirrors, as helping kids see themselves in the literature and then helping other kids understand differing perspectives as well.
Absolutely. And Colleen, you reminded me of a conversation that we had with Enma Leva on the podcast series here that talks about the power of empathy within literature. So, Colleen, what are some of the different texts that you've used in your classroom that you feel students have been the most receptive to? And first of all, when I had you, you were just teaching standard and advanced sixth grade language arts, but over time you've evolved into gifted level instruction. Tell us about the difference in those students and how they've received those texts and which ones worked the best for the ones you were trying to reach.
Well, as far as specific text, I don't know that I can think of any off the top of my head, like specific titles. But what I do know is I make an effort to choose from varying religious backgrounds, from varying ethnic backgrounds. We chose texts from different countries. A Long Walk to Water is actually a really good one because it gives the kids a whole new perspective that they likely have never seen before. And the main character, the protagonist, is their age, but has such a different experience than they do going through war and the violence. Teaching in Parkland, at the high school, I have much more diversity. Teaching in Parkland, though, you don't really see as much diversity. So as the years went on, I made a really, really conscious effort to make sure that I included text with protagonists that I knew were different from them so that they could understand other people and other people's thoughts and feelings and experiences better. And then I was in Parkland, so we would also teach texts that were about the Holocaust. And that is so powerful with the demographic out there because many of them had relatives who survived. And that was one way that they would share because typically they're a little closed off. But when you get such a tragic event like the Holocaust and they actually know someone and their families have spoken to them about this, they really start to open up. That was one of the ways, but we just recently, I did a long walk to water, and that was really powerful. Linda Sue Park has a bunch of different books that are really great.
I think when it comes to having a full classroom of students, one thing that we think about is that they all have their age in common. So as time went on in your more recent years of teaching, how have you noticed the climates change? One example being from the Stoneman Douglas tragedy, which you were also on campus for with me, by the way. I was also on campus that day as well as even COVID. You were also still teaching middle school during the COVID era. How have different recent events alter the way you present stories in classrooms?
Well, one of the and this is something I'm actually really excited about, is there's a lot more resources and a lot more of a focus on resiliency for both right after Douglas, there was a huge push for teachers to be trained and to get the resources that they needed. And for lack of a better word, previously a lot of the emotional management type strategies might have been seen in schools just kind of woo woo, for lack of a better word. Like, like a waste of time. Like you should be teaching them academic skills, not stress management skills. You shouldn't be spending your time doing meditation with the kids or doing lessons that are not academically focused to your core subject. And since then, not only has there been this amazing push for overall well-being for teachers, but for students as well. So I really am loving like the district mandated resiliency training that they do because now I don't feel bad when I do the meditation, when I look around my classroom and I see that the kids are stressed out because their course load is so heavy and they have 3 tests and they're overwhelmed. And now I can put on a meditation and I can do it with the class and dim the lights and go over ways that they can manage their stress. And now it's not frowned upon, which is amazing. And not only that, but because it's been a few years now that the kids have been doing this in an academic setting, they now are used to it. And so they participate and they see the benefits of using all of these strategies. And I see clubs popping up about just making people happy, spreading kindness, spreading well-being clubs. They focus on what you can do when you're feeling overwhelmed. I am so happy to see that because I think for so long, school was this sterile place where you came in and you learned the subjects and there was no room for the rest of the child. And when you're a teacher, the rest of the child is who's in front of you. I mean, if you don't reach the whole child, then you're not going to get much growth or learning out of them because their mind is elsewhere. So I'm really, really excited that now I can not only is it something that the higher ups have made time for in the school day, but I can also supplement it without feeling like I'm a quote bad teacher. I'm not using my time wisely. So I'm just so thrilled to see the emphasis on that. It's amazing.
I'm so glad you brought that up because as we go through the series, I will start to slowly disclose a part of my own story where in 2019 we're talking within the year of the tragedy happening, where I moved to another part of the district and I was entirely shamed by my leadership for continuing to use the meditation strategies. I was actually told it was a waste of time if they're not on iReady working through that. And I was told that it is about the brain, not the child's heart. And it shamed me so much, and I was frowned upon so greatly for trying to work through those strategies that eventually it led to me having to resign from that position because we were no longer a good match for me trying to incorporate the whole child into my own learning. So, for our listeners today that are facing any kind of discouragement from any sort of resistance to approach a full child's being, what advice or motivation can you give those educators listening today?
I would say find some research. A lot of times when you have the cold hard facts and you have peer reviewed research that backs you up, that's always a great place to start because then you have something that you can present them. Find organizations that you can rely on to get some resources and then find the research, find other districts that have implemented something like this so that you can show how it's successful. Get your data. If you see learning gains in your students after using these strategies, get that data and show them. This is from teaching the whole child. The teacher makes or breaks the classroom. If the kids feel connected to the teacher, they're going to work harder. But if you have a cold teacher up there and the kids don't think that you care about them and think that their only life is the life that they have with you in that classroom, then you're going to lose them.
It reminded me of Rita Pearson, a very renowned educator on a TED Talk, who says every child needs a champion. And she says, again, you can have a student in their favorite subject, but if they don't click with the teacher, they're not going to like it. And likewise, you can have a student in their weakest subject, but a great teacher can turn that around for them. And it makes me wonder when it comes to focusing with literary instruction, using some of the methods that you've already shared with us, what are some trauma-informed practices that you incorporate into teaching stories?
So this is a tricky question because teaching in Parkland after there were a lot of texts that I wanted to teach, but when I read them over, they were too close to home. I mean, they
Mm.
were too triggering for kids who had lost a sibling or lost their dance team member or close friends. So I would find shared emotions, or in other words, if the character in the story lost a pet, and then use that as a starting point to open a dialogue about loss in general. That created a safe space for them. A lot of times, and a lot of people, they don't want to talk about trauma because it brings up all of their emotions. They just kind of want to push it down and get on with their day. And there's a place for that, for sure. But I think, and I'm not a psychologist, so there's no authority in what I'm saying, but I think after a while, if you don't let it out, then you turn to some other unhealthier ways to deal with those emotions that are bubbling up. And by talking about a character, it indirectly gives them an out. They are able to talk about this character without having to talk about themselves. They're not talking about their emotions. They're talking about the character's emotions and how that character probably felt. And eventually, if you talk about the characters enough with them, they'll start to feel safe with you and open up. I have found that finding similarities that are not too similar to make them feel like you're targeting them. They just need to be a commonality that they can piggyback off of to talk about their own experiences, their own struggles, without feeling too emotionally overwhelmed.
When I was teaching one of my favorite stories of all time, back with my middle school class in 2019, the text was John Steinbeck's Of Mice and Men. I love
Mhm.
everything about that story. I was asking the students, when we're looking at these 1930s characters during the Great Depression who come from different walks of life and struggle with this image of a broken dream, these characters all lose sight of their dreams because of the isolation that they face in society. So, in helping my own students connect with these characters, I said, think about a time where you have also felt isolated. And what did that mean to your relationship with these characters that we're studying? And the feedback I got from these students was so incredibly overwhelming to the point that I actually had a few kids walk up to my little Zen area at the time and called me out on the fact that I had a suicide first aid training badge in my Zen zone. And he said, after doing this exercise, can we talk to you about that? Because there's feelings that we now feel comfortable sharing with you because we know you have that badge displayed in your room. And it was a big eye opener for me because I knew that they felt courageous, comfortable, and vulnerable because of our stories. But yes, as our research also mentions, from Catherine Tyler, Carol Delatiner, all researchers in the subject field, we're not pseudopsychologists. And that's really important for us to know that line, where we can cross it and if we can cross it. But at the same time, it's hard for us as humanities-based educators to try and sanitize learning because writing and stories are anchors to bringing emotion into a classroom. So I guess my question, Colleen, is how do you navigate those situations if and or when they've came your way?
So I did take a training about what to do when a student comes to you in a crisis. And basically in that training was very, validate their emotions, don't leave them alone. But the biggest thing I got about that is find the professional and refer them to the professional as quickly and as quietly as you can. And that was such a good reminder for me because as an educator and as a person, I want to fix things, but I'm not a professional. And I could easily say something with the best of intention that is not helpful in that moment. So it's so important to have a designated person who is trained in that at your school. And truthfully, I don't know what people do who don't have that person at their school. There are numbers I know that you can call, but if your school doesn't have one, I would really push to get someone designated in dealing with a crisis or a vulnerable child, because that is my go-to is find the expert because I am not that expert. I am thoughtful and kind and supportive and empathetic, but not an expert. And that was
Absolutely.
really hard for me to accept because for so long I was under the impression that I was the person that they should go to, and you should be the one helping them because they are your student. And it goes so much deeper than that. That is not fact.
It's a reminder that these trainings teach us, especially as humanities educators, but for all educators, but exclusively those dealing with pop-up emotions in the classroom, if you will, that our job is to be there while keeping the student safe for now. And again, Colleen, I had you in your second year of teaching, and it's an honor to know you and all that you've learned to grow through since that time as well, as I'm already in year 7. So it's like I'm a few paces behind you, but I'm further than where you were when I had you as a student, which is crazy. And I wanted to ask for also our newer teachers. There's research from Ellen Moore, and Ellen Moore says that the sequence of a new teacher goes from this fantasy where they have this idea that they can change the world and everything's going to be wonderful, but then that fantasy switches very quickly to survival mode within the first semester or so, before you then progress into trying to reflect and then find resilience and anticipation once again for the new year based upon what you've learned. And so, for some of our new teachers listening, can you inspire us by telling us what that moment felt like where you had to accept your own reality and pivot your outlook on the career because of that?
So this actually kind of happened very early on for me.
Yeah.
My very first day of teaching, I walked into the classroom full of hope and fairy dust and dreams. And I went in there and had this get to know you activity. And it was a little squiggle on a line. And so I'm going around and the kids are doing great. And then I go over to the student. And so then I say, again, I'm a naive teacher. I say, would anyone like to share? And he raises his hand. I go, great. And he gets up and he shows his paper.
And ultimately, he shows the entire class a phallic symbol from his paper, announcing it on the very first day of school. Oh my goodness.
And right then, it just shattered for me because here I am, my very first day of teaching, a class full of sixth graders, and this kid has just done everything opposite of my intention for this. And from then on, it was kind of a rude awakening. I'm grateful to that kid, and it's a fun memory now. But you talk about how it's a gradual process. It really wasn't that gradual for me.
Pretty quick.
Yeah, that snapped me right into reality. And from that point forward, I really did think about like, how are all the ways that this could go wrong before I did it? And it's a good thing I have a good sense of humor because I was able to like laugh about it. But it did put a filter on the way that I looked at my lessons moving forward. And the fact that I am dealing with preteens here and they have no filter either. And I learned to be able to laugh it off, all of the obstacles, all of the struggles. You got to be able to laugh and then get back up on the horse and reflect and keep moving forward. So I kind of experienced that early on. It wasn't so gradual for me, but I do remember feeling overwhelmed later in the school year. And I luckily had a bunch of great mentors and just lean on those colleagues. Take all of the lessons that they offer, take any help that's offered to you, and use it until you feel like you are back on your feet and you can start making it your own again. But lean on those experienced teachers or those people who are offering you support, because that's really what got me through.
And I'd love to take a shout out for a second here to a very dear mutual friend to both of us, Miss Fernanda Johnson, who I hope will be listening to this segment. Colleen was my first period, and Fernanda was my second period teacher for world history. And the two of them made our team come to life every day just because of their dynamic dual relationship and just supporting the both of us together. So, Miss Johnson, if you're listening, we both appreciate you and supporting both your peers and your students. So thank you again for all that you've done.
She is truly my work mom, and she has given me through my entire career the best advice that I received. She's the one who told me to choose my battles because as a new teacher, everything was a battle that I was willing to fight until there was no more fight left in me. And she is the one who told me, baby, you just got to choose your battles. Is it really worth it? And it turns out that a lot of it really wasn't, but find your Fernanda Johnson in at your school.
Because every teacher needs a champion as well. Every student needs a champion, but every teacher needs a champion. And I shout out to my own champions as well because they were my own lifeline when I was working with a lot of resistance during that time as well. And so, Colleen, as we come to the end of our conversation, I wanted to know if you could talk to us about some of your organizations, such as Read On with Miss Crisan, and what can our listeners know about the kind of work that you're doing?
So with Read On with Mrs. Crisan, I really try to reach out to the community. It's children's books, and a lot of them have to do with resiliency. And I try to do book drives so that I can provide new books and quality books to families who might not be able to get them for their children on their own and who are going through a tough time. I try to bring families together through literacy, through finding the right book for them. And I'm actually doing a book drive right now for an organization in South Florida called Deliver the Dream. They help families who are going through either a crisis or an illness in the family, and they provide programs for them, retreats, and they focus on resiliency training for those families to help them stay together and support each other through these times. So right now I'm doing a book drive for their event called Toy Chest, where they invite parents in to quote shop for their kids when they might not be able to do so on their own. So that runs until November 30th. And I have the link on my Read On with Mrs. Crisan Facebook and Instagram, and I just try to use it as often as I can to help spread literacy in the community by donating books.
Thank you for that. And you can go ahead and learn more about Read On with Ms. Kassan through the social media pages as well through our show notes. I guess the last question I wanted to ask Colleen is, when it comes to the secret sauce to education or things that you've learned, what is one thing that you want our readers to take away from today's dialogue?
Get to know your students, enjoy your students, and have a really good sense of humor.
And I echo that. I saw all of those in our classroom together. It's been 18 years, but you were always an educator who was kind, who was approachable, and showed that you were there for all the right reasons. So thank you again for motivating us to go on to our larger dreams as we're doing now, as we talk to you. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Joey.
Such a pleasure. So thank you, Colleen, again for sharing your journey and your approaches of using literature as tools for healing, as well as inspiring our other educators on the show today. And your insight is a reminder to us that it's important to create safe spaces for others as a way to build resilience, while also using strategies and methods that help gain insight to the whole child instead of just their brain, because education is so much more than that. And to our listeners, don't forget to check out our upcoming episodes and conversations in order to learn more about resilience and healing. And until next time, remember that you, as educators, all have the power to change student lives. Thank you for tuning in today. Thank you for joining us on the Classroom Narratives Healing and Education podcast. If today's episode inspired you or made you think differently, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a comment or review wherever you listen to podcasts, and stay connected with us on the @Classroom Narratives podcast over Instagram and Facebook. Remember, together we can transform our scars into stars in education, one conversation at a time.